This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, is Ankara, entrusted by the President of the Republic, is pursuing his visit in Turkey. Algeria efforts to adapt climate and energy adaptation were highlighted at the African Climate Summit held in Kenya by her ambassador to Nairobi, who represented the head of state. And the Sahrawi National Committee for Human Rights has voiced its condemnation of the blind Moroccan aggression against peaceful Sahrawi demonstrators, coinciding with the visit of the UN Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura to the occupied Layun. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Zmani. The President of the Republic has appointed Ms. Mariam Ben Mouloud High Commissioner for Digitalization with the rank of Minister, according to a press release from the Presidency of the Republic issued on Wednesday. The President of the Republic has carried out a large-scale reshuffle concerning Walis and Walis delegates. A press release from the Presidency of the Republic said that as part of the reshuffle, the functions of 11 Walis and 2 Wali delegates were terminated. 9 Walis and 5 Walis delegates have been transferred, while 12 new ones and 7 new Wali delegates have been appointed. As you followed in our top stories, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has been received by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, to whom he conveyed a message from the President of the Republic on the occasion of his working visit to Ankara, entrusted by the President of the Republic. More details with Mohammed Khatil.
A press release from the Foreign Ministry indicated that Mr. Attaf conveyed to the Turkish President the greetings of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, as part of the permanent contact between the leaders of the two brotherly countries and their will to strengthen relations of brotherhood, cooperation and partnership. The two parties highlighted the qualitative evolution of Algerian-Turkish relations in various areas, affirming the desire of the leaders of the two countries to promote the achievements made ahead of the next bilateral events, notably the second session of the High-Level Cooperation Council, which will be held on the occasion of the expected visit of the Turkish President to Algeria at the invitation of his brother, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. Meanwhile, the two parties reviewed the latest developments in the Sahel-Saharan region, which constitutes a matter of common interest and source of growing concern for the two countries and for the international community as a whole. The Algerian diplomacy chief informed in this respect the Turkish president about the steps taken by President Tebboune to ease the situation and contribute in particular to the resolution of the crisis caused by the unconstitutional change in Niger, as well as his efforts aimed at encouraging and instilling the development approach to address the challenges besetting the countries and peoples of this region, which has become the scene of the greatest tensions and conflicts in the world. At the end of the meeting, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan entrusted Mr. Attaf with conveying his sincere greetings to President Abdelmajid Tebboune and his wish to meet him soon to continue working on the process of consolidating Algerian-Turkish relations thanks to mutual trust and ambitious aspirations.
The Chief of Staff of the National People's Army, General Said Shingriha, has received a telephone call from the Director of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, Mr. William Joseph Burns. A press release from the Ministry of National Defense indicated that during the telephone call, the two men discussed issues of common interest and expressed their common desire to consolidate cooperation ties and coordination between the two countries in the security-related aspect. The discussions also constituted an opportunity for both parties to express their satisfaction with the level of security coordination achieved, particularly in the area of the fight against terrorism. As you followed in our top stories, Algeria's efforts to adapt climate and energy adaptation were highlighted at the African Climate Summit held in Kenya this week, in which Algeria's ambassador to Nairobi, Mehi Boumediene, took part in his capacity as representative of the President of the Republic. The summit was aimed at providing the continent with effective mechanisms to enable it to better defend its interests more effectively within the bodies dealing with climate issues and sensitizing the international community on the urgency of climate change in Africa. During the summit, the head of the Algerian delegation presented Algeria's efforts in terms of climate and energy adaptation, highlighting the various national programs to reduce carbon emissions, promote renewable energies, and the expansion of the country's forests. In this connection, he listed the various national plans for combating climate change and energy adaptation plans, which focus on the development of clean energies, for which the public authorities have mobilized sustainable funds to create the conditions for the successful implementation. The summit was marked by the active participation of the Sahrawi delegation, led by the President of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Mr. Brahim Ghali. Together with his African counterparts, the President Ghali took part in the event, during which he delivered a speech in which he evoked the efforts made by the Sahrawi Republic to meet the challenges of climate change. He reiterated the Sahrawi people's determination to wage their struggle until independence and deplored the exclusion of the Sahrawi Republic from the EU's climate funding programs and the silence of the international community in the face of the illegal exploitation of Western Sahara's natural resources by the Moroccan occupier. Mohamed Sidati also took part in the thematic panel alongside other ministers on the issue of the effects of climate change. The Sahrawi National Committee for Human Rights has voiced its condemnation of the blind Moroccan aggression against peaceful Sahrawi demonstrators, coinciding with the visit of the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura to the occupied Layuna. In a statement, the committee expressed its strong condemnation of the blind Moroccan aggression against the peaceful Sahrawi demonstrators, coinciding with the personal envoy's visit, expressing its absolute solidarity with all the victims. The statement also urged the international community, with all its bodies, namely the Security Council, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the African Union, and the European Union, to intervene urgently to prevent further deterioration of the human rights conditions in the occupied territories of the Sahrawi Republic. The Sahrawi National Committee for Human Rights warned against the consequences of the dangerous aggressions against the Sahrawi militants, defenders, media professionals, and activists opposing the Moroccan occupation and its practices that contradict all relevant international norms and conventions. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. This is the English-speaking service. The Arab League Council, which met in Cairo at the level of Arab foreign ministers, called for supporting Palestine's efforts to obtain full membership in the United Nations, calling on the member states of the Security Council to accept this membership and calling on the states that have not yet recognized the State of Palestine to recognize it and to adopt and support the right of the State of Palestine to join international organizations and conventions with the aim of strengthening its legal and international standing to achieve its independence and sovereignty over its occupied land. Mohamed Khatel.
In its decisions issued at the conclusion of the proceedings of the 160th regular session at the level of foreign ministers, which was held at the headquarters of the Arab League, headed by Morocco, in the presence of its Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghaid, the Council called on the open-ended Arab Ministerial Committee headed by Saudi Arabia in its capacity as chairman of the 32nd session to continue its work at the international level to support the efforts of the State of Palestine to obtain more recognitions, obtain full membership in the United Nations, hold an international peace conference, and provide international protection for the Palestinian people. The Council also called for launching a constructive dialogue between the League of Arab States and the countries that have not yet recognized the State of Palestine in order for them to recognize it as a lever for peace, security, and stability based on the two-state solution. The Council also reminded the international community of United Nations General Assembly Resolution number 181 of 1947, the Partition of Palestine Resolution the international community implemented 75 years ago and whose acceptance and implementation was a condition for accepting Israel's membership in the United Nations, calling on the international community to link Israel's membership in the United Nations to the implementation of this resolution. It also condemned the Israeli settlement colonial policies and activities, calling on the UN Security Council to assume its responsibilities towards the actual implementation of its resolution number 2334 of 2016 and not to be satisfied with listening to reports of Israeli violations, but rather to work to hold violators of the resolution accountable, to confront and stop the construction and expansion of illegal settlements, the separation wall, racist expansion, the forced displacement of the Palestinian population, and the demolition of their properties. The Council affirmed that boycotting the Israeli occupation and its colonial regime is one of the effective and legitimate means to resist and end it and achieve peace. It called on all countries, institutions, companies, and individuals to stop all forms of dealing with the Israeli colonial occupation system and its settlements that violate international law, including prohibiting the entry of illegal Israeli settlers into their countries, rejecting all attempts to criminalize this boycott and silence people under the pretext of anti-Semitism. The Arab League Council urged the International Criminal Court to complete the criminal investigation into the war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israel committed and is committing against the defenseless Palestinian people, including the crimes of settlement and annexation, the aggression against Gaza, the killing of civilians, journalists, and paramedics, and the forced displacement of Palestinians from their homes, especially in occupied East Jerusalem and Masafer Yatta, south of Hebron, and to call on the court to provide all human and material capabilities for this investigation and to give it the necessary priority. It urged the UN Secretary General to include the Israeli occupation government and the Israeli army on the blacklist. On the blacklist, list of shame issued by the United Nations annually for organizations and countries that violate the rights of children in conflict areas, which constitutes a pressure tool to protect the children of Palestine from the systematic Israeli targeting with killing, intimidation, and destruction of their future. The Council called for supporting Palestinian efforts and endeavors aimed at bringing justice to the Palestinian people as a result of the current and historical injustice that befell them, holding those responsible for all crimes committed against them accountable through international justice mechanisms, calling for the provision of legal advice and technical and financial support needed for these endeavors, calling on the advisory legal committee that was formed in accordance with the decision of the Arab Summit to carry out its tasks in this regard. The Council also called on the United States to work diligently with the parties concerned to implement the two-state solution on the lines of June 4, 1967, and the entitlement of the Palestinian people to an independent, sovereign, viable, and geographically continuous state. It called on the United States to put pressure on Israel to stop its unilateral actions that are destroying the two-state solution and to reopen the U.S. Consulate General in the occupied city of East Jerusalem, cancel the classification of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, as a terrorist organization, and reopen the organization's mission in Washington. The Council also reaffirmed that East Jerusalem is the capital of the State of Palestine, rejected any attempt to diminish the Palestinian right to sovereignty over it, and called on the Arab and Islamic countries, organizations, and funds to translate support for the city of Jerusalem into practical interventions.
The Kremlin on Thursday denounced U.S. plans to provide depleted uranium tank routes to Ukraine, saying Washington would be responsible for any negative lingering impact of the munitions use. Depleted uranium munitions are controversial due to their association with health problems such as cancer and birth defects in areas where they were used in past conflicts, though they have not been definitely proven to have caused such issues. The Pentagon announced this week it would provide Ukraine with the rounds as part of a $1 billion aid package that coincided with an unannounced visit to Kiev by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This is very bad news, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that he would deploy depleted uranium ammunition if Ukraine received the arms. Ukraine, which has been asking for more Western help, launched a counter-offensive against Russian forces in June after building up and stockpiling Western weapons. Now, the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice Wairimu Nderitu, has expressed her concern at the persistent and ongoing levels of identity-based violence in a number of states and regions in Sudan, calling for urgent action to halt the increasing risk of the specter of genocide and related atrocity crimes. Mohammed Khater reports.
Alluding to the widespread violence in the capital Khartoum, Darfur, Kordofan and Blue Nile states, Wairimu Nderitu says in a statement from New York yesterday that after 4 months of continued fighting with widespread human rights violations and abuses, this has led to an unacceptable level of deaths, injuries and displacements of thousands in a conflict with strong identity-based components. She reiterates her earlier concerns expressed in previous statements that intercommunal and ethnic-based violence, if not prevented or halted, could escalate and engulf the entire Sudan in a civil war with high risks of genocide and related atrocity crimes being committed. In her view, the conflict in Sudan, with a dire humanitarian situation and a concerning security vacuum and protection gap, has the capacity to trigger violence in the entire region, including along ethnic lines, which would constitute an aggravated risk of such crimes, a risk heightened by ongoing proliferation of illegal small arms and light weapons. The special advisor is particularly alarmed that disputes between the ethnic communities rooted in long-standing grievances over land ownership and ethnic representation are being exploited by armed groups which have allegedly been retaliating against ethnic communities based on their ties to the main parties to the conflict. In Darfur, innocent civilians are being targeted on the basis of race, she affirms. These attacks, if confirmed, would amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, Wairimu Nderitu says.
Gabon deposed President Ali Bongo Ondimba has been released from house arrest and is free to leave the country for medical treatment, the military, which removed him from power last month, has said. A military spokesman said given his state of health, the former president of the republic, Ali Bongo, is free to move about. He may, if he wishes, travel abroad for medical checkups. The statement announcing Bongo's release from house arrest was signed by the general who was sworn in as Gabon's new head of state on Monday. 14 hours, 48 minutes Algiers time. We're coming live to you from the capital Algiers. This is the English speaking service. Next on our program is a special edition or a special broadcast on Yasmina Khadra.
A story in an artwork. A weekly program that tells stories flavored with art.
Shabi or popular music in Algeria can be translated as Algerian portraits.
Yeah, Algerian portraits. It's about profile.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to our program, A Story in an Artwork. Today, we're going to talk about the novel and bestseller What the Day Owes the Night by Yasmina Khadra. The novel What the Day Owes the Night tells the story of Yunus and his daily life as a little boy, then as a young man, and finally as a mature man in an Algeria torn by passions and war. At the beginning of the novel, we are in 1930. Yunus was only 9 years old when he saw his father's fields ablaze just a few days before the harvest. He sees his father cry for the first time, and the family have to give up the land of their ancestors and leave. They go to settle in Oran in the miserable district back then of Jnanjatu, and the father, full of courage, is quick to find a job and sweat hardly to win his bread and feed his family. There, young Yunus discovers both the inevitable misery his family is destined to go through, but also the hope that energizes the inhabitants of the patio. But nothing goes as planned, and bad luck seems to be hitting the family, especially since the very proud father refuses any kind of financial help from others. His difficult conditions, however, make him give up his pride and trust young Yunus with his brother. The uncle of Yunus was in better financial situation as he was a pharmacist. He was even married to a French woman. Both have no children and consider Yunus as their own son and ensure his education while taking good care of him. Yunus, however, never sees his family again, as he says in this passage. I never saw my mother or my sister again. I do not know what has become of them, if they are still of this world or if they are nothing more than dust among the dust. But I saw my father several times, about every 10 years, sometimes in the middle of a souk or market, or on a building site, sometimes alone, at the corner of a street or on the steps of an abandoned shed. I never succeeded to approach him. I had come to understand that he was not flesh and blood. His new environment starts to call him Jonas, European for Yunus, and the young boy lives divided between his Algerian origins and his French education and environment, just like his name, Jonas and Yunus. His uncle gets arrested by French colonial authorities because of his intellectual solidarity with the Algerian national cause, which was then spreading in the literate circles of the city. When he gets released, he will never be the same again, and the family moves outside the city to Rio Salado, now El Maleh. Yunus, or now Jonas, gradually makes friends there and integrate himself into the city's Romis or European community. He lives happy days with his friends who became indispensable to him. They are called Simon, Jean-Christophe, and Fabrice. They share their dreams of privileged teenagers and watch from afar the arrival of World War II and the rise of Algerian nationalism. And of course, as teenagers, they are also interested in girls. It is Emily, an exceptional, pretty young woman whom Yunus knew when he was younger, who creates division among the friends who are now grown-ups. She comes back to settle in the village and gets admired by all of Yunus' friends, but it is him that she loves. He loves her back, but because of a promise he made to Emily's mother, with whom he had a very brief affair. He cannot give in to loving Emily, who eventually marries Simon, his friend. Yunus also does not want to betray his friends, which makes him suffer all his life and feel alone and misunderstood. The struggle of Algeria for independence invades the heart of Yunus when he is unable to commit and take a side. He feels the urge to help his people, but he does not get involved. In a war for freedom, colonial Algeria lives its last moments, and while the three friends tear each other apart for the love of a woman, Emily, the two peoples, Algerians and French, fight for a country that everyone loves madly, as the author says in this passage. It was predictable. There was a people lying on the ground on which you walked as if on grass. It was clear that one day or another they would stand again on their feet. As for Emily, her husband Simon dies during the Algerian Revolution, and she leaves to France, leaving behind her life in Algeria and her love for Younes, who comes to a decision to be with Emily when it's too late, as we understand from this passage. Whoever misses the most beautiful story of his life will only be regretful, and all the sighs of the world cannot sway his soul. In What the Day Owes the Night's novel, Yasmina Khadra doesn't only tell a story, but also shares with the reader, through his characters, quotes on love, life, humanity, and inner struggle. It is also a book full of wisdom, where a lot of things are said between the lines. The novel also shows life of colonial Algeria from 1930 to 1962, during which Algerians were either marginalized or submitted to the French culture, but in both cases they were subject to racism on their own soil. Literary terms, Younes or Jonas can seem enigmatic. He seems to live his life as a spectator and follows his destiny as if his life was mapped out by others. Quote, "Though there are things beyond our understanding, for the most part we are the architects of our own unhappiness." Unquote. Younes may also be a symbol of the colonized people who tried to fit in the world imposed by the colonizer but could never surpass their origins. In addition to becoming a bestseller, What the Day Owes the Night won several awards, among which were Best Book of the Year by Lire Magazine in 2008, the France Television Award, and the Berlin International Literature Award in 2010. The novel was also brought to the screen by Alexander Arcady in 2012, and the movie was a success as well. And though it was not 100% faithful to the novel, it made the story of Younes and the name of Yasmina Khadra known worldwide.
Younes! Younes!
Je me souviendrai toujours de cette nuit affreuse.
That's it for today's program, A Story in Artwork. Do join us, dear listeners, next week for another story.
Je sais pas qui vous êtes, je sais pas d'où vous venez, mais je m'appelle Jonas.
Qu'est-ce que je t'ai fait, Jonas?
A Story in an Artwork. A weekly program that tells stories flavored with art.